60% of the drivers are doing 10 hours or less a week. So for a lot of folks, it's sort of supplementing income. But you then have to have a communication channel. Like, these folks, they need to be heard. You need to create mechanisms for them to be heard. You need to create mechanisms for, let's call it workplace justice or something. There needs to be a just system in place. And that's what we did in New York with the Machinists Union, is we created a situation where Uber can continue to innovate and do the things we do, but also creating a mechanism for sort of justice for the driver side of the equation. And also getting that feedback so that we are listening and making sure that we are continually making the system better, not just for riders, but also for drivers.
So let's talk about justice for a minute, because obviously, I think everyone knows that criminal justice is a priority. Criminal justice reform is a priority of President Obama, and we can't do it without the private sector. And I know that you have taken a hard look at what you can do to ensure that people who are being released from prison have a fair shot at getting their life on track. Could you talk a little bit about that? And backstage, we were talking about the philosophy of disruptors who also have to be concerned about justice and social justice and the role that they play in society.
Well, look, for us, well, let me say this. Imagine if there were a country where if you were arrested, even if you were found to be innocent, but if you're arrested, a huge amount of the work that's available is not available to you. We're not even talking about convicted.
Right.
And imagine a country where people might be getting arrested that shouldn't be getting arrested. So imagine if that country were the U.S., right? Is that we have systems in place where if you're arrested, you literally can't get work, even if you're found to be innocent. And that's certainly unjust. And so, when you see Uber in the news about, we're opposing this kind of fingerprinting law or something like that, these are ways for incumbent industries to keep Uber from growing by keeping people from being able to get to work. And these systems that are often put in place, and you don't get into these details, these systems that are put in place literally keep people who are innocent who've never done anything out of the workforce. And so sometimes incumbents try to protect their industry, but then they do things that are incredibly unjust. And so I find that when you're an entrepreneur and you're in a place where you're disrupting an industry in a large way, well, it's going to be controversial. You're going to get lots of headlines. Certainly that's something I've learned over the years. But then that means that your principles for how you act, how you bring change to the world, I call it just change. You have to have very strong principles for when you change, how you change, and when you step back and don't do something. And so it's super important. And of course, we appreciate the efforts you guys have done on the criminal justice system here in America. I think there's a lot of things about it that are unjust, and certainly we're fighting side by side to help make sure that the right things happen at the end of the day. Yeah.
Should I talk a bit about criminal justice and our efforts?
I mean, please.
All right. So, well, it's important, and I think it's important for people to recognize that the public sector cannot solve this problem alone. So just a few facts. We spend $80 billion here in the United States on criminal justice. $80 billion a year. We have about 5% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prisoners. That is unsustainable. There are 2.2 million people in prison right now. 600,000 are released each year. And so as we look at reforming our system, we have to figure out, we have to be prepared to be honest and say, does the current system work? And what we know is that we have mandatory minimum sentences, for example, for nonviolent drug offenses, that just don't make any sense at all. We would much rather keep those people in the system, working productively, get them remediation treatment if they need it, get them drug treatment, whatever it is to get them back on track, rather than put them through the incarceration system. So we're trying to work with Congress to reform the laws specifically on nonviolent drug offenders. We're trying to ensure that people who are incarcerated develop the skills that they need so that when they leave prison, they can hit the ground running and lead law-abiding lives. But the most important factor is whether or not they can get a job. Are they qualified for a job? And are there employers who will hire them? And so we really are looking to the private sector to make a pledge to do, for example, banning the box, where you don't ask at the front end, have you been arrested or convicted? You wait and let the person make an impression on you, because you might find that there's someone out there who's very talented, but they made a mistake for which they paid their debt to society, and now they want an opportunity to get back on track. And so we encourage everyone in the private sector to recognize our individual and our collective responsibility to ensure that our streets will be safer, and part of how you do that is you give people an alternative to a life of crime.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you can't get work when after you've sort of paid your dues, what do you think's going to happen?
You have no choice. You have no choice.
And so, this is something like Eric Holder's no longer Attorney General, but something we've been working with him a lot on this kind of stuff, and I know you guys are doing a lot of good work. So I think there's a lot of things that this country has to do from a government perspective as well as private industry to find ways to get people back to work and give that opportunity. And there's a liberty that comes with that, and there's an injustice when you don't get that.
That's exactly right. Do you have any questions for me?
Oh, I mean, wow.
I figured turnabout way, right? Because I could ask him questions all day, but before our time runs out, I thought I would at least open it up for you.
That's interesting. I didn't come prepared with any questions, but I can come up with something. I think, look, as an entrepreneur, like as an engineer, we often don't think about. We try to stay away from politics.
Yes.
Now Uber is.
You have no choice.
Yeah.
Welcome to my world.
But so I feel like I've got that welcome, and it's been a very warm welcome. But maybe turn this around a little bit. Is you're here in Silicon Valley. You get to meet with lots of entrepreneurs when you're here. What's that like going from DC to the Bay?
Heaven. Heaven on earth. I'm serious. You realize that you actually do things. You get things done. You are innovators. You are creators. You make it happen. That is not always the case in Washington. In fact, right before we came out here, Travis and I were talking about the fact that the Democratic members of the House are so frustrated that they have taken to spending the night on the floor because they're trying to get Congress, right? They're trying desperately to get their colleagues on the other side of the aisle to just take the most sensible steps to keep guns out of the hands of people who are a threat to themselves or to others. And the reason I'm not surprised that you're clapping is that the vast majority of the American people agree with that. And yet the dysfunction, the toxicity in Washington, the fact that you have a special interest group called the NRA that has a stranglehold over certain members keeps things from happening. So when you ask me, do I want to come out here and meet people who are going to not just make a lot of money, but change the world, I'd rather be with you any day of the week.
There's a lot of quotes I'm going to pull from that, and it's going to make it onto Uber collateral. Now, what about, and then backstage we were talking about, well, there are so many bright-eyed entrepreneurs making things happen here.
Yeah.
How do you bring that optimism, that can do, and honestly, that let's get shit done mentality? How do we bring that to Washington?
Yeah, well, we're trying to do just that. But you know what? A government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people actually has to reflect what you consider important. And one of the steps that the president has taken is trying to recruit people from Silicon Valley to come into not just the White House, but throughout our administration and make things happen. So for example, some of you may have heard we had a little problem with our website when we first launched it for the Affordable Care Act. If you haven't heard about it, that would be a miracle. But out of that challenge, we really recruited top-notch folks from right here in Silicon Valley to come and not just fix that problem, but then we said, well, you know, we have some other problems that we'd like for you to fix too. So we're trying to bring the best and the brightest talent into government to make a difference. But I also say, and the President says it's the most important office is that of citizens, and we want you all to get involved, and you have to participate. You can't just say, well, that's a dysfunctional group of people. You have to actually try to improve your government and share your best practices that you have found work, and in the hopes that we will try to implement the same. And it's not identical, but there are many ways that we can actually learn from each other and be partners and be participants in trying to improve our nation and our economy and make the United States globally competitive. And that's what led the President to want to have this important summit that we're having here today, so we could have entrepreneurs, not just from the United States, but all around the world, come here to the Silicon Valley, the ground zero for innovation, and let's learn from one another. So we are so glad you showed up. We had a party and you all came. Thank you for that. Well, we are out of time, but Travis, I want to give you an opportunity. Any closing bits of advice? There's so many entrepreneurs who are out here who, I know, sharing with Travis, I met a group the other night who'd been at an idea for 7 years, and finally they're on the brink, and they have figured it out, they have cracked that nut, and part of survival, not just in the private sector, but in government as well, is you just have to be persistent and determined, and keep your view on the long view, and be flexible and learn in between. But you walk the walk and talk the talk. Any advice for some of our entrepreneurs who are wishing that in 6 years they are where you are?
Well, look, I think a lot of people maybe don't know much about my background, but prior to Uber, I'd say there was at least as much, if not more, failure than there was success. And the situation of going through a 5-year period or a 7-year period and it's still not working. Maybe running out of money many times. I've been there. Moving back home. It's not the end of the world. If you've got a family, I'll take you in when times are tough.
Helpful.
I got pancakes every morning. It was good. But I think the thing is that being an entrepreneur is never easy. That's not what you sign up for when you become one. And the minute it gets easy, that means it's about to get really hard. And so just keep, it is about that persistence. It is about knowing that it's going to be hard every day, but if you believe in what you do, you stick with it, even when people think you're crazy. And I like to say there is the role of the entrepreneur is basically to understand the difference between perception and reality. Perception is conventional wisdom. It's what everybody thinks is right or is the answer, let's call it that. And reality, sometimes it's the same, but often it's very different. And I like to say the distance between perception and reality is the innovator's playground. But if you are going to play in that playground, and you're going to tell the world that they're wrong by doing something over here, it means you have to get used to everybody thinking you're kind of crazy. And you have to get used to everybody saying this is not possible, or this is not right, or it's just not going to work. And you have to kind of stick to your guns, and if you are correctly seeing the difference between perception and reality, it will eventually work. And so understand that you may get 100 no's a day for 5 years straight before you start getting those yeses. But if you believe, if you're passionate, and you stick with it, and you are empathetic to reality, and you listen, you will eventually find that success. And that's been my experience as an entrepreneur through good times and tough times. So
I think that's good advice, not just for entrepreneurs, but for life. That's what leadership is all about. at it.